So welcome along to another edition of Isolation Interviews. This is for, of course, Hospital Radio and my YouTube channel. And I'm very excited that my guest today is the fantastic Paul Bradley. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you very much. What a nice introduction.
Now, obviously, life at the moment is a little bit strange. How have you found lockdown? How have you been keeping yourself occupied?
Well, as an actor, we're used to sort of long periods of being out of work and not knowing what's coming next. So, at first it wasn't all that much of a surprise, but it's getting a bit boring now. But I think we've just got to grin and bear it and do it, so it's not been too bad. I mean, you can beat yourself up about not doing things, I haven't read Ulysses yet, although my son has read it again. Which I think is showing off. But you sort of think, oh, well, I should learn Spanish or, German or, but it's good just to chill, and I've done some things, honest. I'm going to tidy my room later.
I mean, that's the thing, is that this is the perfect opportunity to get those jobs done that you normally put off and find an excuse not to do. But also it's a time when, people can get a little bit lost and need to look after themselves, make sure that they're not falling into a bit of a slum, really. You've got to kind of keep yourself in a bit of routine and keep yourself busy.
Yeah, it's a challenge. There's no denying that. And but challenges are good because they're an opportunity to change what you do. And you're right. Keeping healthy and keeping a positive mindset is good. And the thing is, everyone's in the same boat. So it's not like you sort of think, oh gosh, poor me. It's only me. Everyone's in the same boat. It's sort of there's an awful thing about acting is that you sort of think, oh gosh, they're always working. You look at somebody and go, oh, I could have done that. But nowadays, no one's really working. So
I mean, that's the other thing, is that obviously, you've had a very varied career, and you've, one of the big roles that we'll talk about properly in a moment was, of course, Holby City.
Yeah.
But I imagine doing a show like that, does it give you a kind of a newfound respect for the NHS when things like this happen? Because you've kind of seen a bit of what they get up to and what they do.
Yes, I mean, I was very proud very early on in lockdown. We have real, a lot of the time we have, real equipment because it's got to look real. And Holby donated some ventilators to a local hospital, which I thought was really good. I'd like to say that I could operate on somebody's heart after all those years, but I don't think I should. It was funny. I was on a plane journey once, and one of the cabin crew had noticed me, and she'd obviously seen me on television, and somebody had it looked like a heart attack, and she got on the phone and she said, "Is there a real doctor on board?" So I kept quiet, but we had a real nurse there, a nurse, to try and make it as realistic as possible. And then when we did operations, we had an actual surgeon who used to come in and look. And it's not a documentary. It's about the operations and everything are about a story that somebody's going through. And there's a certain amount of jeopardy. Could they die or so it's not totally realistic, but it was good to feel that that people were keeping an eye on it. And then when I first started, I went and I saw 4 operations, and that was just amazing because there are very few circumstances in which you'd get to see an operation. The worst case scenario being if they're operating on you and you wake up. But they're doing a fantastic job. The thing about you know, I can't believe that some people still don't think it's very serious, or that it's, you know, or that it even exists. Some people, which is just crackers. And the awful thing about it is, you know, people say, you know, lots of people recover. They do, but they have to have an awful lot of intense care. You know, so they could be there 2-3 weeks with 4 or 5 people looking after them, and that's exhausting, you know. And of course, one of the you know, the not nice things, although I've seen, and I think nurses do, and doctors, of course, being touched is very curative, but I think they do with gloves and things like that, and they're sort of reassuring, and I mean, they're doing a fantastic job.
I mean, the other thing when obviously you're on a show like Holby is not just do you have to learn the scripts, you also have to learn kind of medical dialogue. And there's a lot of very complicated words and phrases and things that you have to learn. I mean, that must have been quite tricky to get your head around all those.
Yeah, there is. And the worst, because you have to check them all, the worst is if they were misspelled. So you start off saying it wrongly, and then you can't get it out of your head, you know. But it does sound really impressive when you can rattle off some, you know, long Latin medical terms. But yeah, they were tricky to learn. I mean, it was quite it's quite a tricky job, really. I loved it. I really loved it. I mean, I was there 10 years, so I must have liked it. But yeah, you did have to sort of, you know, people say, how do you remember your lines? It's just homework. You just sit down and you go through it. Some of it is breathing, that if you read a line in your head, you sort of like go, well, that's quite easy, but it's better to read it out loud, because then you see what sort of energy you need that's called for in that scene to learn that line. Yeah, breathing is really important in learning lines. And sometimes with difficult words, you just have to, it's sort of like getting your muscles round it, like you would if you were doing a football move or a ballet, you know. You've got to get those muscles to want to say it.
And I imagine the other thing is that you get a lot of people that, you know, Holby's on every week. They kind of come to really know the characters. Did you ever get people that genuinely thought you were a doctor and tried to ask you medical advice?
Not seriously, no. But it's very good for, and it was quite nice for doing Elliot, because before I'd played Nigel on EastEnders, who was, you know, nice but dim. So it was good playing somebody who was very intelligent, because people tend less to, you know, mock you in public. But yeah, no, it was yeah, it was hard work. Yeah.
And like you say, I mean, you were on the show initially for 10 years, from I think it was 2005 to 2015. So
Yeah.
when that first came up for you, what was going through your mind when you were you know, going for the role on Holby?
I'd left EastEnders about 5 years before, and it's funny, as an actor, you've got very few people think you're in a position of power, but I always think your only real power is to say no. You know, if somebody offers you something and you say, I don't really want to do that. I've sorry, I forgot what the question is.
So when you first got offered the role on Holby, I mean, what was going through your mind? What was your thought process of the character?
Yeah. Well, I got offered a smaller, a one episode guest appearance, and when the casting people showed it to the producer said, "Well, why don't we see if we can write a part for Paul?" And they came back to me and they said, you know, would you? And to be honest, I'd never watched Holby, but I started watching it, you know, and I thought, well, this is pretty good, really. You know, they're nice, self-contained stories, and Yeah, and in between leaving EastEnders, I'd done sort of some really nice stuff, some nice theatre and little bits of telly, but I was being offered things that were too similar to Nigel in EastEnders. And the reason I left, one of the reasons I left EastEnders was that I wanted to do other types of characters. I didn't want, on my, people to say, oh, that's all he's played, that's all he's ever played. And I didn't want that for myself. So when it came up, it was quite exciting. But I went in for a guest, and they called me in and said, "Would you be interested in being a longer standing character?" And I said yes, and they sort of wrote a character which was a bit more eccentric, sort of a bit of a maverick, and it was nice. It was nice to play that, because I like doing, sort of comic characters, and that's the main ones I do when I do theatre. So it was nice having a character, and that was the same for Nigel. Really, I was a character who got on that show, which tended to be a bit miserable. I was a character who was sort of fun and didn't take himself too seriously, and got some laughs. And in fact, I was talking because they're on. I got a bit of a shock. Turned on the drama channel, and in the morning I was on in Holby City, and then in the afternoon it was Nigel. Looking very much younger and less grey, and you forget how many you did. But I enjoyed them both, for different reasons.
I mean, I also imagine that being on a show for 10 years, people, loved that character. So, I mean, what was people's interaction when people met you or had chance to talk to you? What was their kind of feedback from them about the character?
Well, it depends on the story that you do, and quite early on, I did a storyline which was where my wife decided to end her life, and that was quite a strong story, and people, came up to me about that. But you'd get people coming up to you on the street and saying, "Oh, I've got a bad leg." You say, "Oh, that's tough, I only do lungs." My dad was a doctor, and so it was, and I come from a family of 6 children, and he always wanted one of us to be a doctor. So he would have been very happy, I think, that I eventually turned out to be a doctor. Indeed, a professor.
And of course, you got to go back for the 20th anniversary last year. What was that like to go back after 4 years away?
It was really lovely. It's a great place to work. It's so friendly, and there's an atmosphere there. It gets less press attention than EastEnders does, or other programs. So you tend to, when you go out, you tend to be left alone a bit more. But it was lovely. Some of the people that I'd worked with before were still there. And it was a bit funny as well, because the thing about, I'm going to be honest here, the thing about being a guest on Holby City is that you never really get the juicy scenes, because the juicy scenes are always going to go to the permanent characters, because their story carries on each week. So it was a bit odd. You'd sort of be in a scene, and I'd be going, well, hang on, I'm the one who's got the big, the illness, or the focus should be on me, but of course it isn't. So it took me a while to, I sort of thought, oh, right, well, that's what the guests must feel every time, when they come in, they sort of go, but it was a nice storyline. It was a Christmas storyline, and Rosie Marcel, I thought was fantastic in it. I mean, she's a great actress, and I hope she gets what she really deserves from that performance, because it was like, you know, film star quality, I thought. So it was good sitting back watching that, you know. And she really, really threw herself into it, you know. It's funny, I worked in between EastEnders and Holby. I worked on the Pianist, the Roman Polanski film, and Adrian Brody was in it, and he played it, and it sort of reminded me of somebody who really threw themselves into it. And he was telling me that he, I mean, he's thin anyway in real life, you know, but they told him, because they filmed all the end scenes at the beginning of the shoot, because he had to look really thin. So like before starting filming for 2 weeks, he'd sort of hardly eaten at all. And he told me that when his mother came to see him after that filming, she just looked at him, burst out crying. And he said that on film, when he got given a sandwich to eat, and he started being sick because he hadn't had anything to eat for a while, you know. I mean, that was but the funny thing about that is he had this big beard and a big coat on, so you couldn't really see how much weight he'd lost. He should have taken the coat off and gone, look. You know.
Now, I mean, we must also go back and talk a bit about EastEnders, because recently, or the show at the moment is on a hiatus because obviously everything that's going on. We have been seeing some repeats of old episodes. Yeah. And of course, one of the big ones which we saw was Sharongate, which you had quite a good part in. So, I mean, did you get to see it when it was on again recently?
I did. It was on in the evening, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And it was a bit odd, and I sort of thought, oh, I don't think I've seen this one. And then I was in it, and I couldn't remember being in it. But then when it came on, I do remember, because the end bit is when Phil has been pushed into the pit in the garage, and Nigel has to come in and discover him, you know. So I came in, and I went. As we were rehearsing it, I sort of went straight in to and the director said, "No, don't do that." And I went, well, what do you mean? He said, I said, that's what I'd do if you saw somebody who'd sort of, he said, no, it's a duff duff. And I went, what do you mean? He said, well, you come in and it goes duff, 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 duff. So when I was watching it, I was remembering, I go, oh God, you know, it looks like I just come in and look and that's it, you know. Yeah, I'd forgotten I was in it. And it's funny about EastEnders is because I still get stopped on the street and people go, but they're of a generation. There's a certain generation that, you know, they watched it as a kid, and I mean, that's the thing about soaps. I think they bring the family together, and you all watch the same thing, and that shouldn't be underestimated. You know, that it's a sort of it's a bonding thing, and people. You know, people have their favourite characters, and you know, it was nice playing a character that was fun. And I remember because I was talking to the writer about it the other day, and the episode where my wife gets knocked down, I'm in the video shop, and I've super glued a pound coin on the pavement. So I'm looking at people outside going to try and pick up this pound coin. And then you get that sort of really funny thing. And then it goes into tragedy, you know. But it was good fun, and it shot in Elstree as well. And in the old days, you used to come through the front door and turn left. And in Holby, you keep going and then turn the second left. And there used to be a canteen where everyone went, and everyone used to go there on Thursday for Top of the Pops, and I sat next to Kylie Minogue. and you'd see bands coming in, and it was really cool. You know, there was really good atmosphere. But I don't know what happened. I think maybe the food got worse, or I think they privatised the canteen, and nobody went there, and nobody goes there now. So when I was doing Holby over the 10 years, I very rarely saw anyone from EastEnders. You know, sometimes I mean there were a few there that I'd sometimes meet June Brown and Barbara for lunch, because they usually on a Wednesday, I think they always had lunch together and a little, well, I say a little chat, very big chat. Yeah, and also I never I worked out this long ago on EastEnders that because you start the day very early, and so I used to just grab a sandwich and then have a sleep for half an hour at lunchtime, and then I carried that on in Holby. So whereas people, you know, would go to the bar or go to the canteen, I'd always just grab a sandwich and a nap. It's called getting old, I think. But it's a good way of keeping your energy going, you know. And I do it for in theatre as well, at matinees. I was going to say during the show.
But I mean, obviously, with EastEnders, you were involved in quite a few big storylines. What would you say was one that maybe sticks in your head the most and was a personal favourite for you?
It's so long ago, but I remember. I forget when it was, but I was not offered. I was told about this storyline where Nigel would be accused of being a paedophile, and he wasn't, but he got accused of it, and I sort of thought, I can't do that, you know. It's the same, you know, what I was saying before is that your main strength is being able to say no. But, you know, they were within their rights to sack me because, as one of the writers said on it, we can't have the tail wagging the dog, you know. But I sort of said I'd be really uneasy playing that, because the way those long-running dramas work is they make you think something, and then they go, well, actually, that wasn't. But the thing is that, you know, being a paedophile is such a hugely emotive thing. It's a huge taboo that it would be impossible going out, and I had young children at the time, it would be impossible going out because people would just go, Nigel the nonce, and then, you know, there's no smoke without fire, and so I did say I can't do that storyline. So after a while, you know, I was sat in one room, the writer was sat in another, and it was going to go between, you know, they're either going to sack me or change the story. And they asked him in first, and I thought, oh God, you know, they're just going to say. Anyway, they took me and they said, we're not going to do that, and you're going to get married instead, which I thought was a better idea.
Yeah, a nicer storyline for yourself.
Yeah, and the thing is that you have to because they change your character sometimes. You have to defend it, I think, because the show, you know, your character a lot better than anyone else, and sometimes you get writing and you just go, I just wouldn't do that, you know. I mean, there was one point. It was when Grant had nicked my girlfriend, and anyway, and we'd had this big spat, and then the following week we were sort of really chummy, and I said to the producers, you know, we've just had this huge fallout, and now we're chummy again. I said, it makes me sound, you know, like I'm a saint, you know. And she said, yes, that's sort of what we're aiming at. And you sort of think, oh right, you know. And that was sort of one of the reasons I decided to go as well, because things were changing a bit, and I sort of thought, well, I don't know, but they eat storylines, you know, and some of the enjoyment and I think the dynamic of it is whether you work well with other characters, you know, and other actors. And you know, I came at a time when there were lots of really good people in it, and some great writers, and really good storylines, you know. And in fact, one of the producers, one executive producers, I was talking to one of the writers, and after I'd been kept on, and I said, I don't think that executive producer likes me. And he said, oh yeah, she does. She didn't. He said when she first came, she wanted to get rid of you. And I went, oh right. And she said, well, give him this storyline, and if that works, we'll keep him on. But if it doesn't, so they had this the Claire custody battle. And and it was actually nice to do something meaty and serious, not be the buffoon the whole time, and that was an enjoyable storyline, because it was sort of like a real bit of meat to. There's somebody grieving and having to deal with a child, and that's one of the I always felt two responsibilities doing any work, you know, like Holby or EastEnders. Always give your best, because there are loads of actors who are out of work, and they're looking at you, and they're going, you know, lucky you're working the whole time. And so I always tried to do, you know, and be professional, turn up on time, and do everything right, because there are too many actors out of work. And the other thing is that when you're doing an important storyline, you have to do it as, you know, have to research and do it as well as you can. You have to do it for the custody. You have to do it for that one person out there looking at it who's going through it as well. So you have to do it as you have to do it for them, and then the truth of it follows for everyone else, I think.
Now, I also wanted to quickly touch upon a play which you did a few years back, which I was so gutted I didn't get to go and see, but you did a Peter James play with Jessie Wallace. So what was that like to do? Because he's such a talented author. So what was it like to bring his work to life?
Deathtrap. Yeah, it was. It's incredibly well written, densely written, a huge part, and that was a challenge, and that I wanted, and also it was a character that well, he murders, sort of, but it was a sort of a dark character, and I wanted to do that, and that was quite amazing, yeah. And Jessie was fun to work with, and I didn't know her before. We were boats that didn't cross on EastEnders, but yeah, it was good fun. It was sort of like, and it's quite nice doing something where you know you're really driving it. You are absolutely in control of it, you know, and yeah, that was really good.
And it must be nice. It must be nice as well to get that instant reaction from the audience, because obviously, you know, they're going along on that journey with you, and you get that instant feedback.
Yeah, and there were real genuine jumps in it, and there was a fight scene that was quite, you know, quite violent. I remember we had to attach, sort of in the struggling, you had to attach wires, because I had to throw him up, and yeah, it was very physical. It was really good to do something very different like that, you know. A couple of years ago, I got offered. It was a really weird gig. It was 1 week, but doing Yes, Prime Minister, and that's a fantastic play, but a huge learn. And you know, again, you just got to go away and slog through it, you know. And I forget who the writer of it is, but he did the TV series as well. But he writes very specifically, and if you don't say it properly, it doesn't work. So like you have to, I learned a lot. I was at the National and directed by Trevor Nunn, and I was losing a laugh, and I didn't know why. And I just passed him in the corridor, and he said, "How's it going?" I said, "Oh, it's all right. I'm losing this laugh." And he said, "Yes, I've noticed that." He said, "It's because you're pausing in the middle of a line." He said, say the whole line all the way through. So it's breath again. Take a big breath and you go right to the end of the line." And so I thought, oh, all right. Anyway, I did it that night. It's got this huge laugh. So people know things, you know.
Now, I just want to say it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for giving up your time. But just before we go, is there any messages you'd like to give anyone who's listening in hospital at the moment?
Well, I'm sorry that you're in hospital, and I hope that things improve for you. And for all the staff there, I know you get a lot of thanks, but everyone really, really means it. And you're in a very difficult bubble. But everyone outside, I think, you know, they're clapping for you every day. I know we've stopped it on a Thursday, which is quite right because it got silly, but everyone's clapping you every day. And thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Of course, keep safe. And yeah, thanks again for your time.
Thank you. Cheers.